What are your thoughts on racism versus classism in the Caribbean? So this is a really interesting question because the Caribbean is a geographic space which aggregates a number of different ethnicities. So you have a lot of different people coming from different parts of the world historically in a small space, and it's I think it's a good incubator for ideas and how groups can live together. But even though we are a melting pot, we do have ethnic majorities within the region. So I think for me to address this question, I have to think about racism versus classism in definitional terms. And I think how I would define racism is an antagonistic or hostile attitude or posture to a person or group based off your own preconceptions or prejudices, and it's usually driven by a sense of superiority, of your own superiority based off race. And classism is much of those things, but it's being driven by class rather than race. But then in the Caribbean, class and race, I think, are often intertwined. So what you will see, so even though the Caribbean is, for the most part, an African majority society, and you see that throughout the region for the most part, when you look at the distribution of economic resources and power in the Caribbean, that doesn't necessarily follow through. So it makes you ask the question whether there are other factors at play in terms of how wealth is distributed or how opportunities are distributed and how those constructs come together. So in Jamaica, for example, people often say, or some Jamaicans will tell you that racism doesn't exist in Jamaica, that it's classism. And I often say that classism is connected with racism in Jamaica. That a lot of classism or a lot of classist behavior is directed to, or hostile behavior, I think, is directed towards persons who are typically of I don't want to say African of descent, but of more visibly or more visible African descent, of stronger African descent, as opposed to persons who are mixed in some way, and you know, there are other ethnicities that they're actually carrying at the same time. And I don't know that I could say that they're not connected. I think that classism is connected with racism throughout the Caribbean. I think people are more likely to find themselves at the lower levels of Caribbean class structures if they're of certain ethnicities than if they are not. And so this is why I think that the two are intertwined, and there's a long history that is behind that. There's a whole long colonial history behind that. You know, you have this field slave versus the house slave, and you know, shadism and that being encouraged and actively cultivated by the plantocracy as a way to divide and conquer. So there's a whole history behind that. But I do think that the two, they're different things, but they are connected. But I don't think that, I think that race is a part of classism and classist structures in the Caribbean. So I hope I wasn't rambling too much.